Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and today's video is part of a blog hop showing all the different uses for the new Waffle Flower Water Media Mat, which I will get to in a minute. First, I need some images to color using the mat. So I am using the Bouquet Builder 3 stamp set that, if you have followed me for any length of time, know that I was very excited for this stamp set because any sort of large floral images I'm all over. So I am inking up the stamps with VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. This is a really good ink. It's very, very similar to VersaFine Onyx Black. I think either one works great for things like this, but I really, really like this type of ink for watercoloring. And I am stamping onto Strathmore's Ready Cut Cold Press watercolor paper. So it's going to take a couple stampings because one, the image is large and very detailed. And two, I am stamping it onto watercolor paper, which this watercolor paper isn't super textured, but it does have some texture to it. So ink it up, stamp it a couple times to get all that detail. And now onto the mat. So this is new. We've known about this for a few months now. They were showing this at Creativation, etc. It is really fun. This media mat is silicone. It is matte, as in it doesn't reflect, doesn't have that shiny surface, which is really nice for people like me who film. But it's also just nice because I like that matte surface and it's white, so colors show up nicely on it. It's non-porous, it's waterproof, it's bendable. It has almost like a suction bottom to it in a sense. The bottom is glossy, and on top of my glass media mat, this thing, suctions right onto it, which I love. And then the palette part on the side there is sized perfectly. You can smush your little ink cubes, which is what I did with the one color because I didn't have ink for it. So I just smushed my little Distress ink mini cube right in there, and you've got all these little wells for watercolors and paints and all these things. I'm really excited that they're finally getting the stock in, and we're doing this blog hop, etc. I'm really excited that I can start really using this mat and playing with it because it's so nice, and I can't explain it. It feels nice too. It's kind of just a random side note, but I'm not even kidding. When I first got it, I was petting it. I need help. Anyway, so I smushed an ink cube in the top well there, and then the other ones I was just using the actual Distress ink that's meant to refill your ink pads. I also like to use them as liquid watercolors because it's Distress ink, and Distress ink is fabulously water reactive and you can paint with it and all that stuff. So I just put drops in the other wells, and then I am just picking up all this color with a wet paintbrush and painting these images. And I've super sped this up in the editing because otherwise we're just going to be sitting here all day, and because this is part of a hop, so I don't want people, stuck on my video forever. And because I don't do anything super fabulous, I just kind of start with a fairly light hand, something I struggle with, but I build up the color as I go along. So I just basically use less water, more ink to really, deepen that color. And I just go along and paint everything. So I did all the greenery first, and I used Shabby Shutters. That was the little mini ink pad I used. And then I used Mowed Lawn Distress ink for the darker shade of green. And then I used Picked Raspberry for the pink and Tumbled Glass for the blue. And then for the flower centers, I mixed Mowed Lawn and Picked Raspberry in that little bottom well there, which created a nice perfect brown. And I use that for my flower centers. So once I did all those, set those aside, I still have plenty of ink left. So I pulled out another piece of the watercolor paper and just a larger paintbrush. And I'm just painting that Distress ink right onto this background. So I was adding the Tumbled Glass. I added some Mowed Lawn. Ended up adding a bit more Tumbled Glass because I really wanted more blue. And while I was doing this, I was I really want to do some ink smushing. That's another thing this mat is amazing for because ink doesn't really pool up on it. It's because of the silicone surface. It's different. So I wanted to experiment and just see what would happen. So I quickly dried this with my heat tool. That's another thing about the mat. It is heat resistant up to, it's 400 and something Fahrenheit. Yeah, this thing is fun. So I pulled out just Distress Oxide. This is Tumbled Glass Distress Oxide. I just kind of smushed it onto here, and that's when I discovered ooh, I need to get the refill for this one because I used it so much. but I smushed it onto the surface and then sprayed it with water. And then I just kind of smushed my entire little watercolor background onto it, which it really softened the background. I wasn't sure exactly what was going to happen because I was using such a light color and I'd already used it with the regular distress ink, but it kind of softened the color and smushed it around. And so I just decided to kind of layer some of that on there. So I just dried this layer here and then added a little bit more water, you know, added some little splatters there, dried that. And then I'm going to wipe this down and just add some water droplets. So again, with this mat, wipes up super easily. Depending on what you're using, I think like because it's white, I'm sure it can stain depending on what you're using at times or if you leave it. But for the most part, everything should easily wipe off, or you can actually, because it's all nice and bendable and everything, and it's silicone, you can just wash it off with like soapy water. Easy peasy, which is another thing I'm kind of looking forward to, because sometimes when I get really messy, I'm like, because, you know, some of my mats and different things, they're way too big to fit anywhere near one of my sinks. But I was like, ooh, this I could practically roll up and just stick it in my bathroom sink and like clean it off. So I wiped it all off. I just used baby wipes to just wipe this all off and it's good to go. And then my main images are dry, so I'm going to die cut them with coordinating dies, which I'm extra sort of obsessed with because the coordinating dies, especially for that large bouquet, doesn't just cut out the bouquet, it cuts out all the little tiny like center areas here and there, which it gives it that really extra something. Like this die set I'm just obsessed with. So I die cut all those images, and I also die cut the background with the second largest of the A2 layers wafer dies. And then for my card base, I wanted to stamp the large bouquet. I had that tumbled glass oxide sitting here, so it's like, well, might as well use that on the inside of the card because you've got to have something on the inside. So I inked up the bouquet stamp again with that oxide ink and just stamped it onto the inside of my card. Again, stamping it a couple times because it's huge. So after I had that stamped, and since I had my platform out, I'm going to stamp the 2 sentiments from the set. There's a nice little scripty happy birthday stamps in the set. So I am going to white heat emboss these onto black cardstock. Let's get everything lined up. Use my anti-static powder tool. Stamp the stamps with some clear embossing ink, coating them with the detail white embossing powder, making sure I have the embossing powder on the stamp, melting it with my heat tool. And then the other little bonus with the coordinating die set is there's actually coordinating dies for these words as well, which is just, you know, a fun little extra, because usually I would just use, you know, sentiment label dies or something like that to trim them out. But it's like, ooh, there's coordinating dies. One less thing for me to have to deal with. So I can just put the dies in place, die cut these, and we're good to go. So I managed to use every single stamp in this set for this card, which for me is like this bizarre form of accomplishment. I don't know, you know, pat myself on the back, whatever. So I die cut everything. And then to adhere this massive bouquet to my background, I'm going to use foam tape. So I just ripped up a bunch of little pieces, trimmed down a few pieces just to, you know, place a good amount of this foam tape behind this bouquet. And then I'm going to place this onto the background. And then all these other flowers and leaves that are separate stamps in the set, I just kind of started arranging them with this bouquet just to give that extra dimension, you know. So I popped some pieces up with foam tape. A couple of the other ones I'm going to tuck behind and just glue directly to the background with some craft tacky glue. So it just gives it that really extra dimensional effect, and it just, I love it. Just love it. So once I get all of the little elements here kind of glued into place and complete my little bouquet, I'm going to adhere those sentiments with a combination of just little bits of foam tape and some of that craft tacky glue. And I just decided to kind of adhere those over the kind of stems of the bouquet because that's just like the perfect little spot for them. And once I have those, I'm going to place a fairly generous amount of craft tacky glue on the back of this. Normally I don't add quite this much, but this warped a fair bit with the watercoloring. Plus there's, you know, a lot of layers and whatnot. So I put a good amount of glue on before I adhered this to the card base. And then as a final bit of embellishment, I pulled out some of my Nouveau Dream Drops, which are, they are dreamy. They picked the perfect name for them. They're shimmery and iridescent. So I used the Dragon Scales, which is the green one, for the background and just went to town and applied a ton of it. Little tiny dots, large dots, etc. And then I also pulled out the Cloud 9, which is technically white, but because I use Distress inks for all my coloring, Distress inks react with a liquid medium, which the Nouveau drops are. So I knew this would happen. The Cloud 9 drops on top of the flowers and leaves like absorbed a bit of the color, which I love, because then the ones on the leaves look green, the ones on the flowers look pink, the ones on the blue flowers, you know, tinted a little bit of blue, which is just fun and gives it a little extra zhuzh without me actually having to do anything. So after I did that, tap my card front really, really good onto just the ink pad there, just to help kind of smooth everything out. And then I set it aside to dry, and that finished off my card. So like I mentioned, this is part of Blog Hop. I will have info on my blog. There'll be a link directly below the video. There'll also be a supply list with links, all that info. You can check out the description box below. Thank you guys so much for stopping by today, and I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye!